Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Wagerspack. Like everyone else, I'm excited to be here and to talk with you and to share with you where we can go in governing our communities. I want to say first, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking your time, and we know your time is valuable, and we appreciate the fact that you'll come and you'll sit with us and talk about those issues that are most important in our public communities. Mike Battle and Mike's going to come on next. We're going to talk to you about something that we've come up with from talking with various members of the public throughout the state, and that is, what does it take to govern a public entity? My job is going to be to talk about the core principles, and Mike's job is going to be to talk about some implementation of those core principles. But frankly, we'll kind of lap over on each other. And always during all of these, as Mr. Wagerspack said, as Diane Allison said, if you have a comment you want to make, then you make it. And you in the chat room, and Lizzie will get it to us, and we'll try to answer. If what our whole goal is, growth for you and us as individuals, growth for our communities. Now, I've given a lot of talks, and I've talked to a lot of y'all, but I've never given this talk. But I've given it to one person early this morning, and that is my little dog, Happy. And he barked and said it was okay. So I don't want you to bark, but if you think I'm okay, you can give me a heads up every now and then and give me a little encouragement as we move forward. And I know Mike would appreciate the same thing. Oops. Let's see. Hold on a minute here. I got it, I think. Nope. Lizzie's going to have to help me. I went on the wrong spot, I guess. Oh, it's that one. That's why I didn't. All right. What we're going to talk about first is fiduciary responsibilities. What is that? Is that a big old word for of fiduciary what? I don't know. Is it an Italian word? Is it an English word? Is it a Cajun word? It is really a word that focuses on how we act prudently and how we treat everyone fairly with no self-interest. So, as I say, when we meet together and we talk, it is the idea that we are holding our hands open, that we're saying, I realize that I am a trustee for this government and for the peoples of this government, not just the entity, but the people, that I hold the money, the assets, the cherished inventory of persons in our community in my open hand. And so that's what we're talking about. And it's really not an oppressive duty. It's really a duty that, as I have worked in government for a long time, I really value and cherish. And I hope you do, because it's something that we don't take lightly. We think it is our chance to show diversity in our communities, to show equity in our communities, and to show inclusion in our communities. It's a chance for us to try to not allow, as this last statement in here says, that the conflicts of interest affect our duties toward the beneficiaries. And who are the beneficiaries? The beneficiaries are all of the people who we talk to and deal with on a daily basis. And so sometimes that can get a little confusing, a little wearing. I know that. And I don't speak to you out of arrogance. I speak to you out of someone who talks to about 30 people a day on the phone. And what I have to remember, and what I urge you to remember, is that the person I talk to at 4:30 is just as important as the person I talk to at 8:30. And if you can do that, and if I can do that, if we can do that together, then our fiduciary responsibility is not an oppression on us, and it is not something that people reject from us. It is them realizing that in doing our work, we're advancing the community. And you'll hear me say community lots of times, because government is a community. If it isn't, it's oppressive. I just heard on the news this morning about all of the parts of the world that have so many issues with oppression. Well, we in America shouldn't have issues with oppression. Our Constitution is built upon people's rights and fiduciary responsibilities of the leaders. So I didn't say this before, but I'm going to say it now. Let's see. You don't have to take notes during this. This is not when I talk to you about legal relationships. This is for us to talk to you about, it is legal relationships, but it's not the laws, it's not the rules. Let's talk about first in the whole sense of governance, I think something that we tend to miss. And that is that there is a difference between a public relationship and a private relationship. And you say, tell me, what is that? What is that she's talking about? Aren't they the same? Did I talk to my friend on the phone tonight? Or is that the same as when I talked to Mr. Wagasback today in the office? I would suggest to you that it isn't. That a public relationship is what I am doing so that I can advance my fiduciary interests, because it is a time when I'm dealing with not my enemies, but my colleagues and my friends toward the common goal of building this community. And a story I read some years ago that I think, I learn by stories. I learn by anecdotes. That's the way I am. Is there was a woman named, and it's a public, so I'm not embarrassing anyone on this. There was a woman named Beatrice Cortez, who was a great leader in San Antonio at one time when they were building relationships in the city to help the poor people in San Antonio become more a part of the government of the city and to better their neighborhoods. Not very different than what we have in Louisiana with people that help. Well, Miss Cortez was not an educated woman, but she's self-educated, and she was the kind of person who went for the juggler, as they would say, to help her community. She knew a lot of people, and the organization that she was running to help people was called COPS, C-O-P-S, Community Organizing for Public Service. She had 2 phones in her house at that time. This was before cell phones. She had one phone that she took all her COPS calls on, all the people that called about the developing of the community and her work with the community. And then she had another phone that was for her family. So one day her COPS phone rings, and her daughter, who was, I think, a teenager at the time, answered the phone, and the person on the other end says, "Hey, is your mom there?" "Yes, sir." "Tell her it's a good friend of hers on the phone." And the little girl listened, and she said, "Wait, are you Mayor Cisneros?" Mayor Cisneros was the mayor of San Antonio at that time. "Are you Mayor Cisneros?" And he said, "Why, yes, I am. Tell your mom a good friend is on the phone." She said, "Mayor," the child said, the young teenager said, "Mayor, I'm going to tell her you're on the phone, but on this phone, my mom says there are no personal friends. So she's going to talk to you." "Wait a minute, Mom, it's Mayor Cisneros." My point, he was a good person. He was in relationship with Beatrice Cortez to build the community, but Beatrice had taught her children there's a difference between our family relationships and our public relationships. And I think in this time of COVID, we might have blurred the lines somewhat in that because we work at home, we telecommute, we have lots of other things going on in our lives that mix in with our work. So I would say that the public relationships, here's the characteristics. They require me to be loyal, impartial, and accountable. That's different than the intimate relationships I have in my family, my close-knit family and my broader family. You say, well, I'm loyal, I'm impartial, I'm accountable to my family, but it's a difference. It's a different kind of level of accountability. It's a different kind of relationship. In public relationships, unlike in families, there's no quid pro quo. You give me this, I give you that. Public relationships are, if they're really public relationships that build a community, that build about transparency and accountability, that form the governance of your community, then those public relationships are not narcissistic, they're not private, they operate in the sunshine. So I would just remember, mayor calls, special friend, no, I'm the mayor. Let's talk now about, as we're talking, let's talk about the whole issue that we see a lot in various, do y'all have it on the screen? There you go. Listening and speaking. Well, you say, now, what does that mean? I know what it means to listen. I know what it means to speak. I'm going to suggest to you, let's talk about this. Listening is not waiting to speak. Listening is not waiting to speak. And speaking is not saying my piece. Does that make sense? Listening is really hearing what the person is trying to communicate to me. And speaking is trying to explain to you where I'm coming from, but in the light of what you have said. That's real conversation. That's real communication. That's what, and I know Mike's going to talk about it, that's what has to go on at public meetings. That's what has to go on in your offices as you prepare for the public meetings. That's what has to go on between you and the guy who calls you 45 times a day asking you questions. That's real communication. That is people coming together trying to come to the common good. Mr. Wagersbach talked about that. What do we have? Some problems in local government budgets right now. And those problems are that people are not really talking to each other. Maybe they're not really listening to the other person and they're not speaking about the common good. So listening is got a goal. It has a goal. And what is the goal? The goal is consensus building. Speaking's got a goal. The goal in speaking is that you understand that I respect your diversity and I want you to be included in this discussion. Now, those are hard things. I write them I can write it, I can talk to you about it, but you know the only way that I can get that done is by doing it and practicing it daily. That's what I urge you to do. That if you're coming to a roadblock, if you feel that communication is lacking in your community, then what I want you to do is to try and listen and try to speak with a knowledge of who the other person is. So when you're listening, you're really opening yourself to others. You're avoiding stereotyping, and you're aware and accepting of people. You say, well, that's easy, right? No, it's really not. We have to really get a real quiet in ourselves to be able to avoid stereotyping and to accept other people. When I'm speaking, I want to be aware of our duty to create the common good and a sensitivity to diversity. If you can do that, then the meetings that you have will be entirely different, I assure you. They will be more transparent, they will be more accountable, and they will advance your community to some other places that you can't even imagine that you can go. I hope you're still with me, and we're still talking about the communication in our communities. Let's see, you got to get this one off screen. You got it? Thank you. Now, communication today is not what communication was 1 year ago, 5 years ago, certainly not what it was 20 years ago. When I came to work for the Auditor, I came to work here first day of work in the year 2000. Well, I was impressed. Everyone here had computers, because not everyone in my past life experiences practicing law had computers. And most people here had the internet. It was kind of running slow, and it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was dial-up, but it wasn't what it is now. But what do we have today? This plethora of things that are out there, right? There are, at our count, we did it in 2021, there were 2.74 billion users of Facebook. Man, I can't even count that high. 2.74 billion users of Facebook. YouTube, 2.29 billion active users. Amazing. So you say, wow, has that changed our world? Has that changed our communication? Has that changed our principles in government? Well, I think it's just heightened it. It's heightened our responsibilities in government. It's meaning that whatever we do in government today, unlike what we would have done in the year 2000, if you do something in government today, chances are it's going to get reported tomorrow. No. Chances are it's going to get reported in a little bleep on my phone in about 30 minutes. When I first went to work for the Attorney General in 1987, seems like a lifetime ago, 1987, I heard there was a 1980s dance at a church recently. I start laughing. I mean, I always thought a 1950s dance was funny. A 1980s, they think that was a long time ago. When I went to work for the Attorney General, 1987, got my first interview with General William Gust, one of the longest serving Attorney Generals in Louisiana's modern history. He said to me, and I found out, not just to me, to every person he welcomed into his office, he said, I want you to remember something. And I had my notepad, pen, and I was going to write it down. Said, Miss Schaye, never called you by your first name. Said, put your pen down and listen to me. Whatever you say in this office, do not say it unless you would be comfortable with it being printed in the Times-Picayune tomorrow morning. He was from New Orleans. He read the Times-Picayune every day, cover to cover. Whatever you say, Make sure you're comfortable if it will be printed, that it can be printed in the Times-Picayune tomorrow morning. I gulped and I thought, oh my gosh, I hope I can speak. I say to you all, whatever you say, it can be printed on Facebook in 10 seconds. It can come up. So is that a fear thing? No, it's just our reality. It is our way of communicating. It is turning the lights on at LED type speeds. You know, it is there, and you have to recognize it is there. Remote work maybe has heightened it even more. And what does that mean to us who are leaders? Because you are a leader. You wouldn't be listening to this if you weren't a leader in your community. What does it mean? It means I have a responsibility to make sure that what I say is appropriate in this public workspace. What I say has got to be treated like I cherish those persons and assets in our community. PII information, personally identifiable information, should never come from the leaders in government. We should always be extremely protective of people's, not only their social security numbers, but their private interests that we know about. The lady comes in to you and she pays her water bill. And she says, you know, I'm having a hard time with my husband. Or the lady comes in, or the guy comes in and he's paying his water bill and he says, my son, I can't get my son to get off drugs. That is personally identifiable information. That is not the kind of information you would put on Facebook. That is not the kind of information that you would communicate in any way other than as a fiduciary, as a trustee. So I would say use this media to your advantage. Does it help us? Sure. Look what we're doing today. There's about 900 people that we can contact despite all our problems with COVID because of the media. But on the other hand, don't give up personal contact. Don't give up the chance to walk into somebody's office and say, how was your day? Don't do that. Get that chance. I think one of the most overworked things, and it's not on here, it's not on this screen, but one of the most overworked things right now is email. I have a friend she runs a very important organization, nonprofit organization, and she has lots of issues every day. And she has people that assist her, but she said there's one person who assists her drives her just crazy. You know why? Not because a woman doesn't do a good job, but she never speaks. She always sends her an email. I said, oh, that's kind of funny. She said, you wouldn't think it was funny if you worked there. She's right across the hall, and she'll say, I just want to make sure you know I have to go home. My father is very ill today. Well, what? Cross the hall. Talk to him. I want you to know our budget is out of whack by X dollars. Talk to him. Now, sometimes email is great, but email can be overused and abused. And email, as one person said to me recently, it's flat on the page. You don't get a tone from email. You say, Mike, I can't understand this. Or, Mike, I really don't understand this. There's a whole difference in that. So look at social media as a help, but not as a substitute for what can happen between persons. They say, uh-oh, she's going to talk about ethics in government after all. I'm not. What I'm going to talk about is how to understand governmental ethics. And it's good to go back to the ancient Greeks, because I think the ancient Greeks had many things right, and their whole sense of community and government is really part of the Napoleonic Code that we live under. But did you know, I didn't know this, so I prepared for this talk. You'll let me get a sip of water. That in ancient Greece, you were put to death if you took a bribe. Are you imagining that? That's how strong they held governmental ethics, that you would die. And then Confucius said, and in the Chinese world, without confidence in the leader, a people cannot stand. Without confidence in a leader, a people cannot stand. So if you take the Greeks, who were going to put you to death if you took a bribe, you take the Chinese, who are going to say, you must have a leader to stand. Then we say, let's look at how do we interpret the Code of Governmental Ethics. How can we make sure that we're in tone? One is, remember this, very important to your governance. Friends and family cannot benefit because of your job. There's all kind of rules about prohibited sources, my participation, but that's all you have to remember. That's what I remember. Friends and family cannot benefit because of my job. 2, vendor relationships in general have to be kept at arm's length transactions. Vendor relationships. You say, who's a vendor? The guy who's selling you the, let's see if I can get this one. Are you listening? I wanted to say no, but I said yes. The guy who's selling you the paper clips, or the person who's installing your new computers. All of those vendor relationships have to be arm's length transactions. 3rd principle for you to remember. There cannot be any acceptance of gifts except in very limited circumstances. Minimal amounts, conventions, I'm eating with you. But generally, you want to be extremely careful in accepting. You're going to get that one off, Liz? Thank you. It's going to be very careful in accepting gifts. It's not that the gift giver means bad or you mean bad. It's like it's a public relationship. It's not the same as Mike and his wife Lisa and I going out to dinner. My relationship with a vendor is different than my relationship with my friends. I can't allow myself to be influenced. I have to keep it at a professional level, at a governance level. 4, that public property and public money do not belong to me. They do not belong to me. And I say this all the time when we talk about ethics and when I talk about public bid, is, we get to the point where we think it's my desk and my computer and those kinds of things. It's really not. It's public property and it's public monies. And I'm just a passing person here. I never really understood that until one time I worked for the Attorney General during my first years back in Louisiana, and there was a very, very important person in that office. Wasn't the Attorney General, he was the first assistant. And everybody called him, and he answered all kinds of questions, and everybody wanted to be at his beck and call. And in those days, you used to take a message and put it on a little pink slip. They gave it to you, your secretary or your assistant gave it to you. And I always was so impressed. I'd go in his office, and his stack, he would put them on a little nail, and his stack would be like 6, 8 inches high. And when he got ready to leave, he called me in his office the day before he was going to retire. And I said, gosh, what are we going to do without you? What are we going to do without you? And you know what he said? He said, Jen, he said, in 2 days, this stack will be one note. The guy who didn't get the note that I wasn't here. It's a public place. Another person will step in. So if you can remember that you're lucky to be here. You're lucky to be in government. So am I. I've spent my whole life in government, and I've loved it. But we're just passing. We don't own this stuff. Finally, I would say to you that this is really simple that I say to myself about ethics. This is a Dutch treat world. No, Dutch treat, you go out with your friend and you say, we're going to split the ticket. It's Dutch treat. I don't know where that expression comes from, but we all understand it. It means Lizzie's going to pay her way and I'm going to pay mine. You can remember that as you go through and wonder if something is ethical. Will I get in trouble with the Board of Ethics? Just remember, I stood on my own and I paid my way. So that comes, I know we're getting a little bit close, but let's go to our next subject that I hope I can go to. There we go. Now, I've said a lot about public and private and everything about how you have to keep it on a certain level. But even as we keep it professional, we obviously have to work with each other. Now, if you don't remember very much of what I say and you think maybe I could have done better, I know I'm right on this one. Government is a team sport. I can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. Mr. Wagasbeck said, I thought he always says this, and it always makes me feel so proud to work for him. I'm lucky to have 240 people who work with me. Government is relational. It is the public, it is the elected official, it's the appointed official, it's the employee. We all have a role. We all have something that's unique and special about our gifts. And important in that role, and let me say it to you, and I know Mike will talk about it some, and that is, it's really important to stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. If you are an elected official, as on the Board of Aldermen or the Fire District Board, then you have a special role, but you're not the executive director. You're not the mayor. You have the role of appropriation. If you're the mayor, you're the top of the heap. But the top of the heap must listen to all of the other people. If you're the clerk in a town, my gosh, you really have an important role because you're talking to the elected officials and you're talking to the public. So all of those relationships happen together, but they don't happen as, one person is doing everything. It is various people doing their responsibilities. And as we do them, we're looking at word I haven't said, and that is that we must be aware of the common good. You say, well, I'm always thinking about that. You said it's a community. It is, but community means it's a whole, not just my department. I'm the appointed head of public works. Is it really important that the bridge is okay? That the flight works? Yeah, absolutely it is. That ice is not on the roads? Absolutely. But it's also important that that the police do what they're supposed to do. It's also important that the lady in the office is able to take people's monies who are paying their water bills. So we have to look at the whole common good from the common good and not just from my particular department. Um, I like this word. I heard this phrase and I think it works. I try it, but sometimes I'm a very competitive person, so sometimes I don't get this right. But it's very important to compromise and not to personalize. So it didn't go my way today. I didn't get that item passed in the agenda. I didn't get that item on the agenda. The mayor wouldn't listen to me. I'm the mayor. I put the budget together, as Mr. Wagasback was talking about. And you know what? This council all rejected the budget. Well, if you don't personalize things, if you don't have a really thin skin, what are you going to do? I'm going to come back and I'm going to try again. When Mike and I were putting together this talk, well, principles of government go with the activities of government. So we talk back and forth. You talk about this, can I talk about this? Things go together. Consensus building is when we all are looking at it from various points of view. Remember what I said at the beginning. We're listening, really listening. We're speaking, really speaking, looking at a person and trying to understand their role. I heard somebody say yesterday, and this made me think about, because I've been thinking about, obviously, thinking about this talk for a while, and the person made a cake for us. Our head of HR made a cake. It was somebody's birthday here. And I mean, that was a delicious cake. And everybody's talking about it, what a delicious cake it was. And she makes beautiful cakes, and she does them from scratch. And then I think she felt bad because we were all raving about this cake. And she said, y'all, it was a box cake. And everybody goes, that me included, because I'm not a baker. She goes, it's a box cake? And she said, yeah. And I'm going to tell you my secret to box cakes. I thought it was like the old commercial, E.F. Hutton speaks, you know. Everybody got quiet. What's her secret? She puts milk instead of water. Where it calls for water, she puts milk. And I thought, oh, God, how smart is that? Relations are like that. If you put yourself out, if you go the extra mile, if you put in the milk instead of the 8 to 5 day, think what can happen. So I would say to you, keep thinking about relationships, that it is a team sport. I have one other thing that I always tell myself when I get confused in the relationships and when I'm having trouble staying in my lane. And that is, we had an auditor here once. I think I'm not going to say his name, but he was a great auditor. Well, maybe I'll say his name because he was a great auditor, and that was Steve Terrio. Mr. Wagasback reminds me a lot of Steve Terrio. Every auditor I've worked for, Daryl Papera, Steve Terrio, Mr. Wagasback, Dr. Kyle, has special gifts. And both Mr. Wagasback and Mr. Terrio have the gift of what I call velvet glove. They just know how to talk to people. They know how to move people in the right directions. And we had a very, very difficult case with a very important public official. And that public official had to come here to this office and talk with Mr. Terrio. And Mr. Terrio, he didn't hold back on anything. He didn't cut the man any slack. but he treated him with the utmost respect as he told him what was getting ready to come out in this audit that was going to be very difficult for this man professionally and in his community. And the man left, and I told Mr. Terrio, I said, wow, that was awesome. That was absolutely incredible that you could talk to him and give it to him that straight. He said nothing else to do. About 6 or 8 months later, Mr. Terrio called me in his office, and he had, I didn't know what, I thought, what did I do today? He said, I got to tell you, Jenifer, who just called me. And who had just called Mr. Terrio was the public official that had gotten the very not good audit. And you know what he called him for? He said, no one in my life has ever been that straight with me, Steve. I really appreciated what you did for me and how you told me straight, and so I need your help. And he asked Mr. Terrio, what do you think he asked him for? He asked him, can you recommend the best auditor, the strictest auditor I can get for my next audit? Because I want to do it right. I mean, I thought that was amazing. And it taught me so much about public relationships and how you have to go with integrity, go with what you think is right, and work together. And, if people have good intentions, and most people do, then it all comes around together. They're telling me I have 15 minutes, and I think I'm going to be okay with this 15 minutes. We have, let's talk about success. What does success look like? What is the underpinning? That's what this slide is about. What's the underpinning of success? Let me tell you what I think it is. You can add to your own experiences. Will help you to add to your experiences. What's the first word underneath there? Hard work. Hard work. Government relationships, government governance requires hard work. You cannot stuff things in a drawer. You can't have any, there is no substitute for open, transparent meetings and quality records, public records that you do. So hard work. There's no question that you're going to have disappointment and endless nights and struggle. I've been here for a lot of years for watching the legislature function. There's always going to be that disappointment that we couldn't do this. I think about it when I go home sometimes, and it's a struggle to get to certain places. But I'll say to you that that's part of success, to work through, to not give up, to come every day with a good attitude. And if you don't, then go do something else. Because government is professional work. Persistence in government, I think, means that it is an everyday job. It's not one event. Like Mr. Wagasbeck said, this is really good. We're happy to do this. But I'm going to tell you that all the people that are sitting in this room with me right now, and those who are outside in our office who are going to come in and talk to you, have spent hours and hours working to prepare. And that's just what we do. I think that's part of what you do as you go to your various responsibilities in government. Government it's not a one-day event. It's not, it's not saying, hey, I'm going to the Super Bowl today. If you really want to go to the Super Bowl in government, you have to go each day and practice each day. Adversity is going to happen in government. because government requires change. And I don't care if you're 35 or if you're 25 like me. It doesn't matter. Change is hard. Change requires something on your part. Action in success is part of success because action is courage. In my mind, you cannot act in government if you don't have courage, if you don't have integrity. If somebody is gonna sit in the back row, they can't be part of government. I don't care who it is, and especially now where, it's great we have more money, but we have less people, and we have to have courage and integrity to act. Why is faith part of success in government? Is because you have to believe in yourself. It doesn't mean you're narcissistic, that you think, hey, I'm the best. Sometimes I'm pretty good, but I'm not always the best. I always am learning. I'm always in the mode of student. I love giving these talks because it makes me learn more about Jenifer, about the work, than probably you learned from listening to me. Also, sacrifice. It's my personal sacrifice for the common good. Sacrificing government to me means I'm willing to put my ideas out there and I'm willing to see them be changed. I'm willing to see them morph into something more. Rejection in government is just going to happen. There are going to be people who don't love you like your mother. I always say there are people who are not going to send me Christmas cards. Not this year. I'm not as good at velvet gloving as Mr. Terrio and as Mr. Wagasback. But that's okay, as long as I had integrity in it. And then discipline is, in government, I think, is because government can be humdrum. It can be, today I got to answer these questions. Tomorrow I got to answer these questions. I have to bring self-energy into it. I have to be a self-starter. So I offer you these suggestions for yourself, and you can add more in your own points of view as to what will cause you to have success. Judge your success by what you had to give up in order to get it. It's the Dalai Lama. And, he apparently has done it pretty well for a number of years. But so you don't think I'm an unfair religious person. I think another person who exhibits success for us is Pope Francis. He looks like the kind of man, to me, I never met him in person, obviously, but who can generate kind of a charisma, not just because he's Pope, but he can generate a charisma around people seem to think he really cares. And, maybe it's his Jesuit upbringing, but not really. He's a Jesuit priest before, maybe because he's a native Italian. You know what I think it is? I think because apparently in his life, he's always gone out of himself to help other people. And so self becomes less, and you become more important to him. You know what his job was where he was living when he was elected Pope? I don't know if you know this. This to me is amazing. He was living in a small apartment with a handicapped priest who he cared for because the priest didn't want to go, or they didn't want to put him in assisted living. Amazing. The guy who's the cardinal, he was a cardinal, and he's living with a handicapped priest. He goes to Rome with one suitcase because he said he always traveled light. He goes to Rome, and he wouldn't let anybody pick him up at the airport, came to the Vatican in a cab, and carried his own suitcase. Now, you don't do that had you not have a life of giving up, of achieving success by what you had to give up. So I say to you, in success, maybe you'll want it, you say, I don't know if this was successful. I'd like to say, here's what I ask myself after an event. One, who benefited from this decision? Two, what does my entity, my community, look like after the decision? And then, how do I feel? How do I feel? I can go to court. I've been to court many times in my life, and I've won and I've lost. But I always tend to ask myself questions like this. And if I can answer those questions, like Mr. Gus told me, so that it could be on the cover of the Times, on the front page of the Times-Picayune, I'm good. But if I answer those questions where I hope you don't know what happened to me before I got here to this point, then I'm worried about myself. And I've got to try again to do differently. A final concept is consensus. And I've been talking about it, but consensus, I don't want to not emphasize this more. Because I think we're in a world right now, especially in governance and politics, where we have too many lines in the sand. Now, I'm not afraid of a line in the sand. Anybody who knows me knows I've drawn a few, and I've changed a few. But consensus really should be what causes us to look at what I have and what you have, and we come up with a decision that's better than each of us would have had individually. And I might not feel like I won. I might just feel like it is the best decision, but I might not have won. Or I might be at the point where I'm on a council of 5 people, and I can get 2 other people to vote for me, and I can beat Mike Battle down at every vote. I've won, but at what cost have I won? Who has benefited? How do I feel? So I think consensus means that every person has got to feel respected, feel that their diverse point of view is important. And I think consensus means, and this is a quote, I believe that you understand my point of view and that I understand yours. Whether I or not I prefer the group decision, I support it. It's ended. We've had our discussion. The budget is passed. I may want to amend it in the future, but I support it. Now, one of the things that I see that militates against consensus that's really significant in my mind is crises management. I want you to think about avoiding crises management. I mean, you have to crises management sometimes. Hurricane Laura, Ida, that's it. But crises management where we just didn't get it all done. And so now we're 6 months out and the budget isn't passed. Or now I forgot or I didn't do it properly to replace the roofs on the school. That kind of crises makes me take no prisoners and kill on the way. You know what I mean? Because I got to get it done because I didn't plan carefully enough. So I think that it's very important to kind of manage crises, that you don't manufacture crises, that you don't have crises because you procrastinated or because you didn't listen or because you didn't plan well. So that's one very important thing. I think the other thing that's very important in consensus building is to do what I said earlier, stay in your lane. Realize where you are in this particular decision making. Sometimes I'm the leader, but sometimes, and I'm not embarrassed to tell you, I'm the coffee maker. I'm the person that picks up the water bottles at the end. Everybody has a role, and if you're out of yourself, you can get into that role in governance. Just because I'm the general counsel doesn't mean I shouldn't wipe off the table. Everybody has a role. Just because I'm the general counsel doesn't mean that I know every law in the Louisiana books, the statutes. I don't. I make mistakes. I call some of y'all back and say, hey, I made a mistake. It is $3,000 for an appraisal, not $5,000. Don't be embarrassed at that. That builds confidence between you and your other employees, whether or elected and appointed officials, between you and the community that you serve. And 5 minutes, she's telling me, and I'm at my last slide.